What happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object? In the world of rock and roll, it looks a lot like this. Back in the 1980s, Freddie Mercury and Michael Jackson teamed up to record 3 songs, yet the tracks were never officially released. Brian May suggested they might see the light of day back in 2013, but that plan never came to fruition. Soon after Jackson's death, the world found out just why Mercury and Jackson's collaboration had been so short-lived. As Joe Burt, who played bass on the sessions, told the New York Post, "I think the last straw was when Michael brought his pet llama into the studio." Queen's manager Jim Miami Beach confirmed this story in an interview in 2012. He explained, "Mercury rang me and said, 'Miami dear, can you get over here? You've got to get me out of here. I'm recording with a llama.'" Yet David Wigg, a journalist and friend of Mercury's, had a slightly different story to tell. He insisted that it was Jackson's chimp Bubbles who had sabotaged the session. In 2014, Wigg told the Daily Mail, "Freddie got very angry because Michael made Bubbles sit between them and would turn to the chimp between takes and ask, 'Don't you think that was lovely? Or do you think we should do that again?' After a few days of this, Freddie just exploded." Mötley Crüe had already earned their reputation for rock and roll debauchery when in 1984 they were hired to open for Ozzy Osbourne. But when the Crüe actually met Osbourne himself, it quickly became apparent that they weren't even in the same league as the Blizzard of Oz. According to the group's autobiography, The Dirt, they were hanging out poolside at a Florida hotel when Osbourne approached, asking if any of them had any cocaine. Against all odds, they actually didn't. But that didn't stop Osbourne from asking guitarist Nikki Sixx for a straw. As Sixx said, "I handed him the straw and he walked over to a crack in the sidewalk and bent over it. I saw a long column of ants marching to a little sand dugout where the pavement met the dirt. And as I thought, no, he wouldn't. He did." According to Sixx, Osbourne snorted every single ant up his nose. While Osbourne himself has claimed to have no recollection of that incident, Sixx maintains that it absolutely did happen. He later told Page Six, "We were a wild young band and he kinda took us under his wing and we thought we could compete with that. But you can't with Ozzy. He won." Back in the 1970s, Elton John went to see Iggy Pop perform in Atlanta. For some reason or another, Elton thought it would be funny to play a prank by showing up dressed in a gorilla costume, so that's exactly what he did. But Iggy had consumed a smorgasbord of chemicals before showtime, meaning he wasn't exactly at his sharpest when Elton leapt on stage and picked him up. Interviewed for the book Please Kill Me, The Uncensored Oral History of Punk, Iggy explained, "I could barely stand up, and that night Elton John came out on stage in a gorilla costume. I was like, oh my god, what do I do? I couldn't fight him." In the same book, photographer Jim Marshall recalled watching the whole thing play out. He said, "Iggy was really shrinking in terror like he didn't know it wasn't a real gorilla." For his part, Iggy insisted that he did actually know the gorilla wasn't real. Instead, he panicked because he had no idea who was inside the suit. He said, "You don't know who's in there. It could be Billy Bob and he's going to kill me." Cher and Madonna have had a complicated history over the years. Their fraught relationship came to the forefront during a 1991 interview, in which Cher conceded that there were some things about Madonna that she admired, and others she didn't.
"There's something about her that I don't like. She's mean."
Cher pointed out that she'd had Madonna over to her house a few times because she'd been friends with the singer's then-husband, Sean Penn. As Cher tells it, Madonna was pretty rude on those occasions.
"Seems to me that she's got so much that she doesn't have to act the way that she acts, like a spoiled brat all the time."
That said, Cher's opinion of Madonna has changed quite a bit in the years since. Appearing on Watch What Happens Live in 2012, she told host Andy Cohen that they'd long since buried the hatchet. She said, "I'm totally good with Madonna. Madge and I have gone through our thing, but no, I'm totally good with her." 5 years later, the two were photographed together while attending the 2017 Women's March, where each spoke out in opposition to Donald Trump. During an appearance on the podcast Drink Champs, will.i.am recounted an incident that took place when he met Michael Jackson in Las Vegas. Apparently, will.i.am invited Jackson to watch him perform alongside Prince, and Jackson said no. Why?
"Prince is a meanie."
When will.i.am pressed him on this, Jackson claimed that Prince had once tried to run him and his mother over with his car. The story has actually been corroborated by Jackson's longtime producer, Quincy Jones. Speaking to GQ in 2018, Jones revealed that an infuriated Prince had blamed Jackson for sabotaging a joint performance alongside James Brown. He said, "He waited in the limousine to try and run over him and LaToya and his mother. He knew. Michael knows he was there." Brian Wilson's death in 2025 closed one of rock music's most colorful chapters. Wilson is renowned as the sonic visionary behind the Beach Boys' trailblazing album Pet Sounds, but he was also notorious for his wild eccentricities, many of which stemmed from his lifelong mental health issues. But it wasn't Wilson who was acting strange on the day he met Elvis. Wilson and Presley happened to be recording in the same studio facility at the time. Wilson was thrilled to get the chance to meet the king of rock and roll, of course, and so he invited Presley to visit his studio to hear some music he'd been working on. When Presley arrived, Wilson jokingly threw a mock karate chop in his direction. Presley, who considered himself to be a serious martial artist, quickly blocked Wilson with a karate chop of his own. Years later, Wilson recalled that Presley was so shaken by Wilson's attack that he walked straight back out again.
He goes, I'm leaving, and he split. That was it.
In his book Eruption in the Canyon, photographer Andrew Burnett wrote about an incident that took place when Eddie Van Halen jammed with Limp Bizkit in 2001. When Fred Durst and the rest of the band all lit up during the session, Van Halen, a devoted hater of marijuana, decided to bolt. As Bennett wrote, the legendary guitarist later described the jam as like being a scholar amongst kindergartners. The following day, Van Halen called Durst about getting back the gear he'd left at his house. When that call and others went unanswered, Van Halen did what any rational person would do. He hopped into the military assault vehicle he'd recently purchased at auction and drove it to Durst's house, parking it on his lawn. Bennett wrote, he got out wearing no shirt, his hair and a samurai bun on top of his head, his jeans held up with a strand of rope and combat boots held together by duct tape, and he had a gun in his hand. When Durst answered the door, Van Halen pulled out the gun and held it to his head. As Bennett explained, Eddie Van Halen stood on the front lawn of a residential home in Beverly Hills in broad daylight, smoking a cigarette while holding a gun on Fred Durst as he went back and forth from the house to the assault vehicle, lugging amps and guitars. Rob Zombie and Ozzy Osbourne have been friends for many years, and according to Zombie, his first encounter with the Prince of Darkness was absolutely unforgettable. Zombie was invited to visit Osbourne's home, and he was expecting plenty of other people to be there too. When he arrived, though, he discovered that it was just the two of them. Osbourne offered to play him his new record, and Zombie, thinking that they'd only listen to maybe a song or two, happily accepted. Instead, Osbourne played the whole album in its entirety, singing along to his own vocals while staring Zombie right in the eye.
And I'm simultaneously thinking, this is awesome, and this is so uncomfortable, I don't know what to do.
Perhaps their strangest encounter, though, was the time that Zombie and Osbourne visited the home of late funk rocker Rick James. According to Zombie, all three men wound up smoking crack. In an interview with Fuse, he wistfully remembered, and then someone caught the couch on fire, and I think James had his girlfriend tied up in the corner. It was good times. These days, Joel Walsh enjoys a life of sobriety, but that wasn't always the case. As Walsh explained in an interview with David Gans, he learned his hedonism from the best, The Who drummer Keith Moon. As Walsh explained, Keith Moon really taught me how to do that. He was a master at it. During an onstage chat at LA's Troubadour Club, Walsh recalled how Moon took him under his wing when his band, the James Gang, opened for The Who.
One of the most terrifying things that ever happened to me was that Keith Moon decided he liked me.
After that, Moon insisted that neither of them would sleep until the tour was over. With Moon as teacher and Walsh as student, they embarked on a full-blown spree together.
He taught me a lot about the finer arts of anarchy, chaos, damage, destruction.
Walsh was no slouch when it came to debauchery, of course, but he soon realized that Moon was partying on a completely different level to himself. As he once said, all these Keith Moon stories are true. This guy was full-blown nuts, and you never knew what was coming next. Back in the day, Peter Frampton's band The Herd landed a slot as the opening act for The Who, and thanks to the archaic antics of drummer Keith Moon, what should have been a great opportunity nearly proved fatal for Frampton. As he later told The Express, at one theater, Keith Moon stuck his head out of the dressing room window and the girls outside started screaming. He said to me, "Here, Pete, shove your head out." The next thing I knew, I was dangling out the fourth-floor window. Keith had one leg and John Entwistle had the other. There I was, full dangle. That wasn't the only torture meted out to Frampton by The Who's rhythm section, though. He also revealed that the pair of them tied him to a radiator. On top of that, Frampton recalled another encounter with Moon years later when they were both staying at the same hotel. Frampton happened to be in the lobby when Moon decided that the front desk clerk was too snooty for his liking. He watched in stunned silence as Moon left the lobby, got in his car, and then drove it through the hotel's glass entrance. As Frampton remembered, he smashed into the front desk and demanded his room key. Alice Cooper was in Las Vegas when one evening in 1970 he was informed that Elvis Presley wanted to meet him. Cooper agreed, and he was summoned to the King's hotel room. When the elevator doors opened, he found that a pretty eclectic group of celebrities had been invited alongside him. Legendary singer Chubby Checker, cabaret star Eliza Minnelli, and adult film actor Linda Lovelace, of Deep Throat fame. Cooper later shared his account of the evening on the British game show Nevermind the Buzzcocks.
He goes, "Hey man, you're the cat with a snake, ain't you?"
When Cooper confirmed he was just that, Presley said that working with a live boa constrictor on stage was a pretty cool idea. He even said that he wished he'd thought of it first. Presley then ushered Cooper into the kitchen, where he opened a drawer and pulled out a loaded .38 revolver and placed it in Cooper's hand. For whatever reason, Elvis had apparently decided to show Cooper how to disarm someone holding a gun.
The little devil's here on my shoulder says, shoot him.
Sadly, Cooper never got the chance to listen to that devil, as Elvis demonstrated the same martial arts prowess that had once laid low a Beach Boy.
Before I could decide what to do, I was on the floor. And he's had his boot in my throat. I'm going, that's good, Elvis. That's good.
When Nirvana played the Los Angeles Forum in 1993, Eddie Van Halen was one of the many fans in the crowd. Before the show, frontman Kurt Cobain had met the Van Halen guitarist backstage, although what actually went down has become a matter of some dispute. Speaking with Rolling Stone years later, Sonic Youth's Thurston Moore recalled running into Cobain that night. He said, Kurt was walking down the hall and I said, dude, Eddie Van Halen's in your dressing room holding court. And Kurt goes, no way. He was real excited. Kurt went into the dressing room, walked right up to Eddie and kissed him on the mouth. He had to do that. However, Nirvana guitarist Pat Smear shared a conflicting memory of that meeting during an interview with Dimension 7. According to Smear, Van Halen was heavily inebriated at the time. When he asked Cobain if he could play on a few songs, Cobain turned him down. Smear claimed, Eddie Van Halen comes backstage drunk out of his mind, and he started begging Kurt to let him play with us. It was so disgusting. He was like, I'm all washed up, you're what's happening now. It was horrible. While those two accounts appear to contradict each other, it's worth noting that Van Halen was far from washed up at that time. Just 2 years earlier, Van Halen's album For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge had debuted at number 1. No guitarist influenced Keith Richards more than Chuck Berry, but that doesn't mean Berry was always willing to put up with Richards' nonsense. Appearing on The Tonight Show, Richards remembered a time when he was backstage during one of Berry's shows. After the show ended, Berry ran off to collect the money he was owed, leaving his guitar laid out in its case. Of course, Richards just couldn't resist the temptation of picking up one of the most famous guitars in rock history.
Oh, come on, Keith, just a touch.
Unfortunately, timing wasn't on Richards' side. Just then, Berry walked in, yelled at him, and then punched him right in the face.
That's one of Chuck's biggest hits, baby.
Luckily, it appears that there were no hard feelings on Richards' part, and he even admitted that he probably had it coming after all. Of course, Berry had a well-earned reputation for being something of a grump. For example, he once famously clashed with Richards on camera during rehearsals for a joint show. During his Tonight Show interview, however, Richards insisted that the iconic guitarist's thorny exterior concealed the softer side. He said, he was a little prickly, but at the same time, there was a very warm guy underneath that he wasn't that willing to display. Usually, famous musicians tend to meet each other after they're already famous, but that wasn't the case for Slash, who met David Bowie years before he hit the big time as guitarist for Guns N' Roses. Back then, Slash was just a kid named Saul Hudson, albeit a kid whose mother designed costumes for the likes of Janis Joplin, Ringo Starr, and Bowie himself. In his memoir, Slash revealed that his mother's relationship with Bowie became romantic after she was hired to work on his costumes for The Man Who Fell to Earth. Slash wrote, along the way, she and Bowie embarked on a semi-intense affair. Looking back on it now, it might not have been that big of a deal, but at the time, it was like watching an alien land in your backyard. When he was 8 years old, Slash walked into his mother's bedroom and experienced every child's worst nightmare. During an interview on Australian radio, Slash said, I caught them naked once. They had a lot of stuff going on, but my perspective at 8 was limited. Looking back on it, I knew exactly what was going on. Obviously, this revelation made a fair few headlines at the time, and Slash quickly voiced his regrets over bringing it up. In another radio interview, he said, I'm embarrassed because I'm sure David didn't appreciate it, and my mom, rest in peace, probably wouldn't have dug it either. When Mötley Crüe drummer Tommy Lee and Kid Rock attended the 2007 MTV Video Music Awards, they had but one thing in common: Baywatch star and Playboy record holder Pamela Anderson, who was the ex-wife of both. According to eyewitness Carson Daly, Lee walked over to greet P. Diddy while Kid Rock was out of his seat. Lee's timing, however, was a bit off. As Daly told Access Hollywood, Kid Rock came back to his seat and all hell broke loose. Kid Rock and Tommy Lee's fight is part of rock legend today. Interestingly, though, only one punch was actually thrown. Speaking to Access Hollywood, the rapper Sway said, I can't say who started it. Tommy Lee took a blow. It was over so quickly. If you blinked, you would have missed it. Kid Rock was held back by other attendees while Lee was likewise restrained. At one point, Kid Rock picked up a chair, presumably to use as a weapon WWE style, although he doesn't appear to have followed through. And while initial reports suggested that Kid Rock could face criminal charges and up to 6 months in prison for starting the fight, no charges were ultimately filed. It's fair to say that the southern rock genre was a heavy influence on the Black Crowes. No surprise then that in 1990, frontman Chris Robinson and his brother guitarist Rich Robinson wound up backstage at an Allman Brothers show in New York City. Recalling that night during an appearance on the Howard Stern Show, Robinson explained that they were initially greeted by guitarist Warren Haynes. who praised the recently released debut album.
As we're talking, there's like a little room, and Gregg Allman's in there like combing his hair for like 8 hours and blow drying it.
Robinson said that Allman got up and walked into the hallway where the brothers were speaking to Haynes. And while Haynes seemed quite happy to introduce the brothers to Allman, Allman himself was less than enthusiastic about it.
And as he walks past this one, goes, Greg, this is the Black Crowes, the two brothers from Georgia I told you about. And he looks at me in the corner and he goes, who gives a
Most people might have felt a little stung by a snub like this, even if it hadn't come from their musical hero. Luckily, Robinson found it to be quite the thrill.
I loved it. Well, I mean, if he'd stopped and said, hey, great to me, I wouldn't have a cool story.
Kurt Cobain had some interesting relationships with some of his contemporaries, and not all of them were positive. Take Axl Rose, for example. Rose had been instantly captivated by Nirvana and soon became a huge fan of the band, but the feeling wasn't mutual, and Cobain made this abundantly clear when Metallica's Kirk Hammett tried and failed to convince Nirvana to open for Metallica's joint tour with Guns N' Roses. Things then took a downturn at the MTV Music Awards when Rose stormed over to confront Cobain as he was speaking to Hammett. As Hammett later told Revolver, I'm like, oh no, and he goes right up to Kurt and says, what's your problem? And so Kurt's like, whatever, dude. When Rose's girlfriend Stephanie Seymour attempted to calm him down, Rose erupted in a string of expletives, threatened Cobain with violence, then stormed off. According to Hammett, Cobain then said, man, I don't know, that guy's nuts. Even as the Sex Pistols hit it big with Anarchy in the UK, they were riding on the coattails of the original punk rock outfit, the Ramones. In an interview with Classic Rock, bassist Dee Dee Ramone recalled being backstage at one of their gigs when their frontman, Joey Ramone, was holed up in the bathroom. As a result, the band's other members had to get creative when nature called, urinating into bottles while the bathroom was occupied. After that, the Sex Pistols' Johnny Rotten showed up. In the same interview, Johnny Ramone explained that the yellow liquid deposited into empty beer bottles very much resembled the beer those bottles previously contained. And, well, you can probably guess where this is going. As Johnny Ramone tells it, then Johnny Rotten picked it up and started to drink some and said, boy, this stuff tastes like urine. Of course, Johnny believes the blame for this mistake lies entirely with his colleague in punk rock. He added, nobody's supposed to pick up strange bottles lying around and drink out of them. Years later, it was clear that there was no love lost with the former Sex Pistols singer who by then was using his real name, John Lydon. In 2019, he and Marky Ramone appeared on stage together as part of a panel promoting the epic docuseries Punk. At one point, Marky told Lydon, if not for the Ramones, you'd be doing fishing trips somewhere. Lydon then claimed that Marky had been more interested in drugs and forcing political upheaval, to which Marky fired back, you talked the talk, but you didn't do the walk. Weird Al Yankovic found fame when his accordion-driven parody of Queen's Another One Bites the Dust became a surprise novelty hit. Weird Al built on that success by producing memorable parodies of songs like Beat It, Gangsta's Paradise, and Ridin'. Considering the wild success of the Nirvana album Nevermind, it's perhaps no surprise that Yankovic wanted to parody Smells Like Teen Spirit. First, though, he needed to get Kurt Cobain's permission. This was easier said than done, however, as Cobain proved to be quite elusive. In an interview with Neil Bremon's podcast The Blocks, Weird Al revealed that a friend in the Saturday Night Live cast helped him track down Cobain while he was rehearsing for Nirvana's first appearance on the show. Speaking with Cobain over the phone, Yankovic explained that he wanted to parody Cobain's song.
And he said, oh, is it going to be a song about food? And I said, no, it's going to be a song about how nobody can understand your lyrics. And he said, okay, yeah, great, that's funny.
At the time, Weird Al was dealing with the box office failure of his film UHF, and he hadn't had a hit single in some time. Thanks to Cobain, things soon turned around. Weird Al later told Loudwire, when I came back with Nirvana, that brought me right back into heavy rotation on MTV, and it brought me back into the top 20 on the Billboard charts.